What
Good to see you again, CJ.
what a treat. I'll tell you what, rather than I'm gonna sort of throw formality and formal introductions to the wind and instead dive right into just the really beautiful kind of relationality and unexpected intimacy that was discovered, and that will be the unfolding of an introduction and then further discussion tonight. So, of course, Reverend Leon is the author of what in this course we've called our deepening text, which is high praise and high honor, Reverend Leon, for us to think of this as a deepening text, which indeed it is. Home is here, practicing anti-racism with the engaged Eightfold Path. And I had been aware and kind of anticipating the release of this book last year, and so was already excited and was kind of intrigued by the possibility of maybe being a part of our course. And then even more excited when I discovered that you were going to be in Portland last fall doing a reading at Powell's. And then thrilled for us to be able to talk during that reading and meet a little bit. And that's when I learned what I had no idea of, which is that you were also a student of Blanche Hartman's, which of course was also a student of our teacher Flint here. And I thought that was so auspicious, and so we began to kind of float the idea of the possibility of your joining, and if it would be okay with you for us to use your text as a part of this course. And here you are tonight, so uh, it's really lovely. So what we're about to do will be a conversation between Reverend Leon and our teacher Flint, and of course we'll be talking about the Eightfold Path. Of course, we're going to hear from Reverend Leon about the nature of her work on this book, and anything that she can share with us about that. We'll hear a little bit about maybe some encouragement from each of these teachers as we endeavor on this study and practice. But first, I thought we would really lean into the beauty of this connection through Blanche. And that, in fact, I think already situates us right on the Eightfold Path as a path of relationality and intimacy, and what's passed down to us from warm hand and warm heart to warm hand and warm heart as the Dharma wheel turns. And so I wanted to invite each of you to maybe share a little bit about, like, perhaps a first encounter with your teacher Blanche, a first recognition of this is my teacher. And of course, through our discussion, Ryan and I will be helping to guide our direction. But please, Leanne and Flint, feel full freedom to ask questions of one another and respond to one another and take this wherever you would like. But I wonder, Reverend Leanne, if you would start us off by sharing any moments of important memories with Blanche.
Okay, thank you, and glad to be here. Sorry, I thought I came on a little early even, but it seems like maybe you all were waiting for me. I apologize if there was a misunderstanding. Um, Hi, Flint. Good to see you again, and glad to see everyone. Let me start out by saying my pronouns are she and they. I'm zooming in from Greater Rancheria land, Petaluma, north of San Francisco Bay Area there. And yeah, auspicious to for this all to make connections here. And yeah, CJ's energy and Powell's was very vibrant and really happy. You're on this coast now, right, CJ? I'm not wrong in that. Okay, all right. You said you had just moved to Portland, in fact, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So um, well, Blanche would be very happy that all these connections are happening because I will say Blanche, as she would say it herself, and it totally proof is an extrovert, and was always as she put it, I'm you know that everyone wanted to have tea with her, and she wanted to have tea with everyone. So that was definitely Blanche. How I met her actually is totally within her realm of being and realm of a connection. Was actually I was practicing in the insight tradition, and had moved to San Francisco and was doing that, and was in Martin Luther King Day March. And I actually was part of the Buddhists of Color, one of the first people of color group in San Francisco. And Jessica Tan, who actually lived at City Center, San Francisco Zen Center City Center, got us the Buddha Hall to meet once a month there. And that's how I knew um, Jessica and San Francisco Zen Center, but I was doing Insight and happy about it. And as we were marching, and it was going to the Baptist church down the street on 3rd Street, we were just coming past City Center, 300 Page Street, but going up the hill, right? And at the top of the hill, Jessica was like, "Oh, there's Blanche," because Blanche had walked all the way from, I can't remember where we started. I don't remember. It used to be Justin Herman Plaza for many years. So honestly, I don't remember where we started, but probably there. And I think she had passed and then decided to stop at the top and go back to City Center. You know, it's pretty long way. And so that's actually how I met her, which, you know, totally makes sense because she was in a lot of marches and out there. Trying to do social justice work in her way. And yeah, so that's how I was like, oh, Abbas, you know. And she was very friendly, but it was totally like, you know, more marching by. But certainly that's very Blanche. That's all I can say. Yeah. Flint, how did you meet her? I mean, I met you at Tassajara, and you were part of Barbara Cohen's group, I remember too, right? In
Right, right.
Texas. Yeah.
I was I was coming to San Francisco Zen Center just a couple of times as a guest student because I was living in Texas, and I didn't have any idea of who I might study with or choose as a teacher. I was just kind of fascinated by the whole show. You know, when you're there, it's like, oh, this is the big thing. And I think when I met you at Tassajara, we were there with a small group for Sangha Week. It could have been, yeah. But so I was just sort of wide-eyed and watching what was going on. And one day during service, you know, when you're in the Buddha Hall at Page Street, you're sitting in those lines on either side of the main, the bowing mat and the altar. And Blanche was doshi that day for morning service. And I was still trying to figure out what to do. So I was, you know, stumbling around. And as she approached the bowing mat and made her offering of incense, and then came and took her zagu and spread it out, and then looked at the altar, I was like, what is that? It was the energy, it was the presence, it was the devotion. I think I mentioned it too in my email to you. She has such a playful and wonderful social side, but she had this immense devotional side. And I saw that in her. And here I am, this overeducated white guy coming to this place and all these male teachers and other people, but she like went right into me in some way. And I said, I want to know what that is. And so I asked for to meet her for Dokusan, and then my life changed. Things happen. Lots of stories like we both have over time, you know.
I think my I was at I went to Tassar, for those who don't know, kind of by mistake. Well, not really mistake. How can you mistake that, those 14 miles, right? But to get in there, but more just to do a practice period. I'd come back from after the first time going back to Vietnam and came back totally like, who am I? It's a little bit in the book, where do I belong? And so I talked with, did you remember uh, Ilda Gutierrez Baldoquin? You know,
Absolutely. You know,
yeah, yeah.
she was the one person from San Francisco that came to my ordination in Texas. And then
Oh,
I went to San Francisco and I shaved her head the night before her ordination.
oh, how lovely. Another connection. Yeah.
Yeah.
She,
She was so dear because, we also went to were we in Japan together? No, that was Sasha. Anyway, we spent a lot of time together. And both of us as queer people too, we enjoyed that connection.
yeah, yeah. So she was part, since we were at City Center, um, she was in and out with the Buddhists of color. We were like a peer group, and also, to be honest, she had asked Blanche to start a people of color group at City Center, and I was part of that. And she had said to me, "Well, how often should we meet?" And I was like, "Every week. I'm looking for a place to go," because the Buddhists of color was just once a week, right? And the women of color was, I think, I'm sorry, once a month, the Buddhists of color, and I think the women of color. I don't remember how often they met now, but it was far in Marin City. And yeah, so we were in room 10, her Blanche's Dokusan room for many times. It was just me and Ilda in that group. And actually, when I came back, I was floored from Vietnam and didn't even know anything about practice discussions, because in the insight tradition, you only get those in retreat. And Jessica Tan, who was saying she had a great PD with Ilda. So I was like, oh, I want to go see what that is. And anyway, that's another story. But I went to Tassajara to get the credit. In those days, in 2002, you had to work the whole 5.5 months of the summer to
Mhm.
get practice period credit. There were no partials, there were no different version. And I did the summer to get the practice period credit, but only planned to do one because I just needed a 3-month retreat, you know. And Blanche was my the first teacher of my practice period, and it was doing Shosan. People know Shosan are probably, yes, yeah. After, I don't remember which
I
session.
don't think many people do, you might say.
Oh, so at Tassajara, it's 3 months, and in every month we have one. It's either usually a 7 day. I think there was only one 5 day, and Blanche had a 9 day session. And so afterward, you have like Dharma combat, but really it's called Shosan, where Blanche or the practice leader sits in that those throne-like chairs at the front of the altar, and then there'll be two lines, and one's coming up, and you do your prostration. Then you ask. It's like a Shuso ceremony, but you're doing it with a teacher, and it's just a Dharma exchange. And actually, that season, the first practice period, it was during the rainy season. And I don't know if people know, at Tassajara, the zendo, the current zendo was supposed to be a temporary zendo when the first one burned down. So the roof is tin. So it was pouring. It was so loud that we had microphones, which of course brought out people, like there was singing, there was jokes, there were all sorts of things happening. It was and also Blanche is very vibrant, so it was a very vibrant Shosan. And I realized that Blanche was a bit verbose, and so I had gone up to her and said, um, let me see, what is wisdom, right? And she looked around and just pointed to everyone, right? And I said, well, but what is wisdom beyond wisdom? And then she was like, and then I went to bow to, oh, and I had said to her, oh, yeah, that's it. Because she was so verbose, and I said, oh, I don't want any words from you. I just want you to answer me, you know. So first she pointed to everyone, then, you know, then she kind of went like this when I said, what's wisdom beyond wisdom? And part of it is so clueless about Zen, you know, and there were certain people who were teaching in a way that I totally didn't understand. The first year I was there, I didn't understand most of the Dharma talks. And then though, when I went to bow to finish, because you bow before, you ask a question, you bow again, she jumped off her chair and did a full prostration with me, and our head almost, you know, collided. And that's when I was like, whoa, you know, this, it's that like total engagement. She always showed up. She and Lou showed up
Mm.
for everything in the schedule and wholeheartedly participated. And very, very practice oriented. And that's what I say to my student, you know, there's not there's a reason I'm Blanche's student, because I'm very practice oriented too. Yeah.
I'm gonna share an image here real quickly, and you know this one, I'm sure, but it shows some of her power,
Mm-hmm.
both by walking that you were talking about, but also her resolute sense. So
Yep.
mhm.
Do you know who took that, Flint?
I don't.
I don't either. It's she had it on in her room for a long, long time.
Right,
Maybe,
right.
I'm not quite sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know where it came from.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I wonder if I might ask if either of you remember any of your final moments with your teacher, Blanche.
Well, I was there to address her after she died. Um, I live, you know, 15 minutes from city center, and got a call at 3:54 in the morning on the day that she died, and showed up at the temple. We waited for another student of hers to come, and mm, they didn't appear. So it was Vicky Austin is the one
Right.
who called me. Myself and my newish girlfriend at the time, who came with me, poor Dab, who doesn't practice at all. Not really poor Dab, I mean, at the time I'm sure she was just, and then Ellen, who just got ordained, but at the time was a chico for Vicky. So we
Mhm.
dressed her in the Buddha hall, because since she was abbess, she was laid out for 3 days in her full robes. So yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I was at a meeting in the Bay Area. Gosh, I can't remember what year it was. It was just a year or two before she died, but and I called her up and I said, I'm going to be in San Francisco. Could we have dinner or something? We need to meet. I haven't seen her in a little while. So she said, sure. Um, and I drove into the city, and the most miraculous thing is I found a place to park near city center, and walked up the steps, and it's in the evenings, it's locked, of course. I'm knocked because you got to be able to let in, and the door opens, and she's standing right there with her purse and her cane, and she's like waiting, you know. And I said, well, could I, since I'm here, I brought my rockets, and could I offer incense and make a bow, to the temples? And she said, oh, yeah. And so we opened the Buddha hall, and she said, I'm going to sit in the back. I can't stand that long. So you do it on your own. So, and it wasn't incense anyway, now it's different. So we did that. And then we went across the street, catty corner to the little restaurant we had, and getting her up and down the steps and back again was a little bit of a chore. We were patient, and we came back into city center, and of course it's completely quiet, late evening. And we went to the little thing they put in for Lou, really, to take him up the stairs.
Mm-hmm.
And we
Yeah.
went up to the second floor, so I wanted to take her to her room so she'd be set. And we got to the Kaisando, which the doors were closed at the top of that landing, and for those, that's the founder's hall. We started to pass by, and she said, wait. And so she undid the doors, opened them, reached around the corner on the left side, and turned the lights on. She said, maybe you should pay your respects to Suzuki Roshi before you go. And I was completely surprised by this. I didn't know. And so how it's raised up. So I stepped up to go in. And for those of you that don't know, on the altar is almost a life-size carving. He's a small man on the altar. And I step up and she grabs my arm and stops me.
Mhm.
And she says, Roshi, this is one of your disciples. She starts talking to him.
Oh.
And of course, I completely lose it.
Oh.
Oh dear. And it's so sweet. And she's holding on to me.
Uh-huh.
She talks a little bit about, this is one of your disciples, one of my students, and he's says a few things, which I can't remember now.
Mhm.
And then I go and do my bows, and I come back and
Mhm.
turn off the lights. We close the doors, and she holds onto my arm, and I walk her, down that side hall to the right to her apartment,
Mhm.
and we hug and kiss goodbye. And that was the last time I saw her.
Yeah. Lou was the one who opened the door in the morning and closed it in the evening.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah. That's a whole nother story. Talking Lou stories, but
Yeah. True. And his seat in the
yeah.
center. Yeah. Yeah.
I wonder if you both could perhaps talk a little bit about sort of your introduction to the Eightfold Path and whether that came through Blanche or through someone else. And I know just from our email exchange as well as your book, Reverend Liam, the obviously some of your engagement with the Eightfold Path has shifted over the years, but I'm curious if you could just sort of start about how that became, since this is our first time as a community really engaging the teaching of the Eightfold Path. I'm curious how that was first presented to you as students and perhaps how it's evolved as well.
Sure. Flint. Well, I got a lot to say on it. So Flint,
You're
you maybe.
the expert. I'm deferring to
No, I'm
you.
not the expert. It's my whole life. So
This
maybe.
community gets a lot of me. They get not that much of you. And I'm really interested in hearing what you have to say. I have a couple of things I can say, but you take the lead, please.
No, I would like you to go first. So,
Oh,
if you,
okay. Well, can we start with the Katagiri quote?
yeah, let's do it.
You know, Blanche wasn't like a real academic teacher.
Mm-mm,
She didn't teach that way.
mm-mm,
The way that she taught, well, for me, let's say personally, I spent a lot of time in the sewing room with her.
mm-hmm,
And so when we'd go in and we'd light incense, we'd make our vows and we'd start sewing and and then she just talks, as you
mm-hmm,
said, and telling me stories and I ask her questions and we're engaged in something. And that engagement focuses our energy, but then all these other things would happen. And the stories that she told and the way, if this makes sense, the way that she managed the fabric
mm-hmm,
and the activity um, showed it all
mm-hmm,
in a certain way.
mm-hmm.
And she was very fond. I pulled these up because I'm so visual. I like to do these things. Um, can you see that?
Yes.
She loved um, this quote. She would use it all the time. We sit to settle the self on the self and allow the flower of our life force to bloom um, by Katagiri. And this is in Reverend Lynn's book. She talks about this. And you can see that the S's are different. Settle the self on the self. And this is from, sort of my psychological training, that all ourselves on this larger self, if you want to say it that way, to allow ourselves to come forward in a way that, and you may not have seen this, from Liam, but this poster, I'll get to that in a moment. Blanche would always say also, in faith we are Buddha, we enter Buddha's way. It's the first line in the precepts in it. It's one of the first lines in all the ceremonies, but she kept emphasizing it all the time. That's where you start. And you emphasize this in your book so much, understanding wholeness. Even what the nuns in Vietnam are asking you, do you understand? Yeah. And this poster we sometimes use. Don't you guys put this outside the Zendo sometimes during retreats in Minneapolis? So realizing the Eightfold Path to the end of suffering suggests that these 8 things, this is a more traditional way of naming them, is if our view is in accord with life, if our intention is in accord with life. It's a certain way of talking, which opens up differently in the end's work, and I think it's wonderful. Because the question, out of your statement in your book, where you say so much of suffering inside me and in the world stems from this desire to be fully alive, to stay connected with every moment. This is part of what I'm talking about, being in accord with life. But the question is, in accord with whose life? What life? What is a life? You know, those bigger questions. And we chant each moment, life as it is, the only teacher, from Joko. So anyway, this is just a little way that I think about the Eightfold Path. And just one more while I'm at it here. I took this picture of Blanche. Of course, it's with glass over it, so I see my own reflection. But you know, that's her question all the time. And of course, as a Dharma transmitted student, this is some of what's being asked. And I love that place in the book where you talk about loving everyone the same and completely. You know, and this is kind of what she taught. And it reminded me of an old, this gets us off track, reminded me of an old thing that Ram Dass used to talk about when he asked his guru, Neem Karoli Baba, I said, just give it to me straight, tell me the one thing I need to do. And he said, okay, love everyone and tell the truth. And he thought, but wait a minute. The truth is, I don't love everyone. And yet I want to love everyone. But this gets to the heart of your work also. How do we find that place? And I think I might have had one more little thing. Oh yeah. This is a picture of Molokai from the Soto mission here during the Bond dance. We talk about the end of suffering, but I did a retreat recently and I changed it. And then when I'm reading your book, it's like you say the same thing, curiously. It's sure it's about the end of suffering, but really it's the restoration of joy. And I love the joyfulness of this little auntie here. So those are just a few things that I had in mind as I was reading your book and thinking about Blanche and the things you mentioned. So I hope that was okay, just to give you a little, some images of my mind.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, those are lovely. I was like, I was like, oh, that's a nice thing to put out to Zendo. I'm like, oh, this is the first time I've seen myself in quotes. Some Slack now, so I was like,
it. I thought it was
great.
fun. And the guy walking on the path is me. So
Oh, okay. Well, good. That's a nice blend of the both of us. Well, I honestly, I have never heard a talk on the Eightfold Path in my Zen training.
I haven't either.
Yeah, it isn't actually a Zen teaching. I mean, of course, the Four Noble Truths are in all the sects of Buddhism. That's the foundation of Buddhism. You know, Gil Fronsdal is one of my teachers, and he started out, for those who don't know, he started out in the Zen tradition, and actually he and Vicky Austin, who's my Zen teacher now since Blanche has passed, were, I think they got Dharma transmission and not just priest ordination, but I could be wrong about that, from Mao at the same time. And of course, Mao is Blanche's teacher also. He says that the Eightfold Path, and of course he's a Pali scholar, and he says that the Eightfold Path, what the fourth of the Fourth Noble Truths used to be just practice. That was, you know, then you practice. That's the Four Noble Truths. The fourth of the Four Noble Truths. And then it became about, this is the path, so that of practice, the Eightfold Path, and to be enlightened, or at least as an arhat, as the epitome in the Theravada tradition, of course. In Zen, of course, the six paramitas is how a bodhisattva is supposed to live and act. So that's partly why we don't get any teachings on the Eightfold Path. So really, I started on it because I was at a Generation X teacher conference in 2017 in June, And it was around the time when yet another round of sexual misconduct had come to into open in several communities in North America. And so they had brought in, at the conference, they brought in right use of power as a restoration model, which I loved. And it's also Cedar Barstow, who's a social worker, and being a social worker, all the more reason to love it. And I did really enjoyed it and appreciate it. And it's a little bit in the book. And yet I left it thinking, I've been through a lot of trainings um, through my years, both as a social worker, but also in my Zen training. And some other model is always brought in. Nonviolent communication was big when I was at Tassajara. And so I was like, well, there has to be something in Buddhism, because that's where I go for my source. And so I just really was thinking of it, how do we use it as a restorative model? So I don't know if you want me to say a few things about the reframing. All right. So for me, as an engaged model, we begin with not just that there's suffering life, but that hurt and harm, or harm and harming, has happened. Because to me, the first noble truth is actually the hardest one, because you have to acknowledge suffering. I mean, for many of us, myself included, when I came and heard that, I was like, oh, thank God, someone's telling the truth, right? A truth that I can understand, like, yes, they're suffering, instead of things being like, oh, nicey, nicey. Not that there isn't joy in life and stuff, but to live in a way, like the analogy in the book is as life feels like a cage, where your suffering just really feels deep and overwhelming. That to hear that, like, they're suffering in life, you're like, yeah, that's my truth, right? And I think as a restoration place, we have to say, what is it that's broken about our values? And that the Zen part, I think, in what I do, is that we start out in wholeness. And to as I like to say, Zen is like, we're like cheerleaders, we're like, yay, Buddha nature, we're perfect already. And yet, we could use some help, as Suzuki Roshi says. And when we need the help, it's harder to get. And so I lean into the insight practice, probably because I started there and got those tools as a way, because they're very clear about how. And the Eightfold Path, I think that is the elegance of the Eightfold Path, is that it's very clearly says, this is what is classically the word is wholesome. Each of the steps say what is wholesome and what is skillful. And I hope people know the right that is more appropriate, which works well in the Zen thing. As I'm pretty sure it was Anastar Bhikkhu in a talk I heard, says that the reason that the right is used is the right place to go and milk a cow. You wouldn't pull in the tail, you pull in the udder, and that's why it's the right. They're very like practical in the Buddha's day, of things that people could relate to. And so that's where the right comes in. So it's more appropriate. And yet I like skillful, because it does point you towards what is skillful. And of course, upaya, or skillful means, is really important in Zen. So it points you towards what is, and then it gives you very pragmatic ways of practicing that. So you start out by saying, oh, hurt and harm has happened, because to restore anything, one has to agree what that is. And I think that's where the conflict comes in, when we can't agree what the issues are that we all need to work on. And then from there, I think we have a better sense of how. And then we also have, of course, to know the origins of how dukkha arise. And so the second noble truth of the engage isn't that much difference, except for we lean more into the conditioning, or the systemic. And part of that is, for me, I really feel like and again, I'm sure it's my social work and psychology background, but the sense that conditioned, of course, is how we were taught, how things were laid out for us. And so when we realize that's something we learned and that was taught to us, then we can unlearn things and relearn things. And so it's really a positive sense. And then when we go into the third noble truth, and where do we find agency, right? Where do we find the agency to have a sense that there is something we can do? And of course, the third noble truth to me, in terms of, and especially in the skillful enactment, the skillful action, it's mostly the precepts. So if we think of the third noble truth as, if you take the four noble truth as effect and then cause, effect and cause, then if the effect is hurt and harm, then you see what the causes are. And then if the effect is joy or agency, then what are the ways to get there, right? What are the causes, which is the Eightfold Path. And so really that emphasis is, when I know that when I'm overwhelmed, say with oppression or any challenges in life, I feel powerlessness is something that is very overwhelming and difficult. And so that connection that there is something to be done here, not just by myself, but with the bigger self, you could say, right? That I'm part of the bigger self. By that I mean community or others, or really that they're values that we hold on to, that we, the five precepts, probably all over the world, we have similar, these are fundamental values. And so if these are broken, how do we lean into that we can repair, right? That's essentially, and there's joy in that then. And then the fourth, of course, is the Eightfold Path. And of course, people realize that the Eightfold Path, where there are 8 of them, they're broken into 3 groupings. The first is the wisdom grouping, which is skillful view or skillful understanding, which is on the Four Noble Truth and karma. And I think the key is karma, really, which is the responsibility in Buddhism, right? Where you learn accountability, and also where you learn that you're not separate, right? Because it's conditions come together to create this arising. And so we're only a piece of that. So that's the skillful view or skillful understanding. I like to think of it, I was just giving a talk at MLK Day for another Zen group. And I like to think of it, and because I was using Martin Luther King, the arc of the universe, of the universe is long, or social justice. That's a paraphrase, I can't pull it up exactly. Is that I like to think of the skillful view is really our set of values or our moral universe. So karma is the moral aspect of our universe. And so we want to have this view of the Four Noble Truths is our universe, right? This is how, as a Buddhist, we go into thinking of how the world comes to be and how things arise, and the causes and conditions for the rising of things, not just dukkha, but everything. And then, so then next is usually skillful thinking. However, thinking is never passive in Buddhism, and in any point, but Buddhism really points us towards that. And so, intention has been a word used a lot, motivation also, but I lean into motivation because for me it is both, again, gives you that sense of it's my intention, but it also puts into it that sense that because of my intention, I have a drive or have an aspiration. So motivation gives you that sense that you're being propelled, right? And it makes sense because it goes into the second third, which is usually called the ethical conduct. I like to say compassionate conduct, but it's the interactive part, right? And skillful speech, skillful action, which is basically the 5 precepts. And I call it enactment because I want to bring in the sense of vow that comes with it. Or these days, I think of it as a superpower. Our vow is our superpower of the Bodhisattva, right? And so, and then skillful action, action, and then skillful livelihood. I like to think of livelihood more as living, in part probably because, there's more than our work. There is talk about work, of course, and what kind of works are skillful living in the Eightfold Path. But it is much more about what is the more lean perhaps into kind of the paramita sense of virya, which is what is our life force? What is the kind of living that we want to do with our life force? And then the third is the samadhi or the meditative grouping, and that's skillful effort, skillful mindfulness, and skillful concentration. Now, Gil says that, and I lean into this and it works for me, is that while there are three, and that's pretty much the classic layout of them, the meditative qualities are actually the bridge between the wisdom aspect and the interactive aspect. And so meditation is where we sit down and we go, oh, am I living according to my value, or have my actions been according to my values and my sense of the world, right? And so yeah, and then I rearranged the furniture a little bit, as Kyra Duolingo, I think, was the one who told me that I did that. And mostly because I in the course I put the meditative aspects into working with some of the other, which makes sense, you know, especially as a course, these are the meditative qualities that we're gonna establish. And you do start with concentration first, probably because of my Zen background in part, but I think that stability, you know, the result of concentration is actually both emotional, mental, and bodily ease, more so bodily ease. That's why, you know, on the fourth day of a sesshin, your knees still hurt, but they don't bother you so much because your body is just like relax more. You know, you don't, your mind too, but your body is just like, oh, it's just painful. I'll just live with it. Whereas the, you know, the first 3 days, you're like, how can I move? You know, keep moving. That's when the shelves of extra support cushion empties out and stuff like that, and they have to make announcements to put some back if you're not using them, right? And yeah, you try positions you haven't tried before and stuff like that. So I don't remember why I brought that up now. Oh, the fourth, yes, ease, bodily ease is the result of concentration. Mindfulness, you know, is always working with concentration, but mindfulness, of course, there are two parts to mindfulness that people don't necessarily point towards very much. Is one is that we mostly think of mindfulness as doing, and that's the practice of skillful mindfulness. And it's saying, you know, mind the gap, mind how, being aware as I pick this up, that kind of thing. And then the quality of mindfulness to me is much more of, I like to say, attending, a little bit managerial, but not, well, analogy I like to use is kind of like the the manager in a restaurant, right? Because that's the person that notices the whole thing and wants the whole thing to work well. But a good manager is not going to go, hey, go do that over there. You know, the milk has spilled on table 3, you know, but they're like, please, Bob, go clean up the spilled milk on you know, table 3 or whatever. Or, oh, there are a lot of people waiting, hostess, whoever, host, whoever, you know, please attend to them or something. So you want a manager that has a subtleness, but sees the whole picture and can help you negotiate, because that's what the quality, the subtle that is needed. Of course, we have these all the time, you know, we don't get them from anywhere. We strengthen them by our practice. And so concentration, while they both work together in mindfulness and concentration, the stability of concentration strengthens mindfulness so that it works in a way that brings about insight more likely, because otherwise you can be mindful of anything, you know. Most of us are mindful of our phones a lot, right? So you can be mindful of anything, but so the key though is also that it's always skillful mindfulness. This is the part that is often forgotten in, I think, in popular mindfulness stuff. Should I tell a story, or is that enough talking? I could pause too around skillful mindfulness. Yeah.
Hear the story.
Okay. So someone, I don't know, did you meet Lelio when you were at Tassajara by any chance? He's a Thaian young man.
Say the name again.
Lelio. Really
don't-
sweet, dark hair guy.
I don't remember.
He was there when I was there, and then he went off and became a Plum Village disciple.
Oh,
He was from Italy, so he spent a lot of time in France. But then when Thich Nhat Hanh had a stroke and was in the Bay Area to get health care, he was put up by a very fancy place in the marina by a disciple. But anyway, Lelio came to be one of his caretakers. And so I was hanging out with them, because we were friends and then seen from years. And he told me the story a couple of years before that at Plum Village in France. All the European teachers in the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition had come to, for a conference or whatever. And so a French teacher said to Tai, the French army wants me to teach them mindfulness. What do you think I should do? And I thought, I have sat with Thich Nhat Hanh, like 2,000 other people in the hills of Spirit Rock before they built the retreat hall in downtown Oakland a lot of time, and of course read his stuff. So my idea of him at the time was like, oh, as long as you're mindful, just mindful everything, right? As long as you're mindful, that's okay, whatever you're doing. But Hoi Truck, as his name is now, said no. Thich Nhat Hanh said, everyone forgets skillful always goes in front of each factor of the Eightfold Path. And if it's not skillful to be mindful about killing others. So no, do not go teach the French army how to be mindful. So I think this is the other part that we really want to be very clear about with the Eightfold Path is very definitive about what is skillful. Of course, we have to make it, as I did, contextual to our lives now, our contemporary lives. But the key is what is skillful here. And again, I think in the Theravada tradition, or as I've heard it, discernment is actually the what's the word I want to use? The very highly valued part of wisdom is discernment. And in fact, your practice is continuously, are you refining your discernment, right? So then there's a sense of not so much of what is right and wrong, but these are parameters to discern. They give you a very clear parameter, what is the wholesome positive qualities of the Eightfold Path, and then they give you tools, but the practice is the discernment, and that's how we develop wisdom, by discernment.
Reverend Lee, and I wanted to ask you just one more question, and then we'll open it up to all who are gathered here to ask questions of both you and Flint. But one of the many powerful things about your book and your work is situating the Eightfold Path, of course, not only for the individual, but addressing systems and structures and how we care for the fabric of the whole. Can you speak to us just a little bit about the importance of that turn that you've taken in the book?
Well, I use them, or I present them really with the net of Indra. And I was yet another social work piece merging with the Dharma. I was at City Center in 2015 on the 50th anniversary of the March on Selma. So I was giving the Dharma talk. And at the time, because of my social work training, I was using the net of Indra, or Indra's net, as the, very general analogy of interbeing. And then I had a little mind meld of my social work where Patricia Hill Collins and the Matrix of Domination or Matrix of Oppression, which actually came out in 99, I believe. And I think she even used the word intersectionality, but she was not that well known as when the word became much more big, and Crenshaw, of course, is given credit for it. But basically so at that time, in terms of social justice, sociology, social work, there was really sense that, oppressions are individual, silo, as opposed, and she really brought in that their intersectionality, and her in particular was on gender, race, and class. Yeah, so that any moment in our interaction, depending on situation and condition, whether we're in the up power or down power position, shifts according to, like on one level, CJ, I think I'm probably up a higher power than you, up power in the Dharma realm. And yet, in the social realm, if we stepped out of this room and we had an altercation on the street and the cops were called, then you will have the up power position, because that's the system of racism. So, oh, I apologize. Are you identify? I made the assumption.
You are right. Yeah.
Okay, so that would be true. So this is where the intersectionality of them can change so much, and that's more an up power thing. But the matrix domination is also saying that the matrix is not so, two-dimensional. It's actually quite, different layers to it, or different intersectionality of, again, for her it was gender, race, and class. And so anyway, so that sense that it helped me to see then at that moment that while the usual way of talking about the net of Indra from the Ava, just I've been talking too much. Help me out, Flint. How come I can't say the word right now?
Abhidharma?
Saka Sutra, excuse me, is very much that in the net at the nodes, they're jewels, and the reflective nature of jewels is to reflect all the other jewels, and that's our interconnection. And yet, really thought we need to really examine the net. And I think part of it is that there can be a misunderstanding or misrepresentation of the oneness in Buddhism as perhaps a normalized kind of oneness, or a dominant kind of oneness, as opposed to a sense that, again, it's layered, and that the oneness is actually multiplicity, and oneness is in the multidimensional of things. And so then the idea is that if we focus more on the net, which is the interconnections and systems also, because if we look at nets, and where is it that often historically or by policies, certain strands of the net are not taken care of, so that they break, or they're weak, or where they're too strong, so that more resources are going to certain sections of the net, and therefore certain jewels or something, so that they shine too bright and overshadow the other ones, or they're so heavy that they actually break the net in those areas. And so if we see things in that way, then we realize that actually we're all stewards of the net. Nodes are parts of, and jewels, of course, are part of the net. And yet it's what happens between us that, of course, also super important. That's what we mostly remember, right? And spend a lot of time actually creating. We just need to pay more attention. And in some way, that's our practice, our ancient twisted karma. Can't think of them as anything except strands on the net anymore myself, So, yeah. Does that answer your question?
And I think that I want to just underscore this, because I thought, and I said it in a message to Leanne, that shift in perception about the fabric, the totality of the fabric, and not just the jewels. It's one of those things that once it's pointed out, it seems like it was always obvious, but you didn't see it. And now you can't see anything otherwise. I think it's a brilliant formulation. I really want to thank you for that.
Thank you. Patricia Hill Collin really mind melded with me some.
Yeah, sometimes these things come, and then there they are.
Yeah.
Would
Also,
you both go for it?
Oh, I was just going to say, there was in my little picture making, I loved the way that you also talked about the triple treasure and the fulfillment and enactment. And so I was trying to I was trying to summarize it for myself in a way.
Sure.
And so I did this little chart, just real quickly,
Yeah.
because you talked about this in a very different way.
Mhm.
You know, the source of wisdom and realization is what we think of as Buddha, and the skillful means is the Dharma, and then trust. I loved that with Sangha, because it's awakening to wholeness, enacting wholeness, and trusting wholeness.
Mhm.
Wholeness being, so that was just one of my ways of, does that make sense from what you were trying to convey?
Yeah, I think so. I think here's the other thing that the Theravans point to a little bit more. Um, in some ways, well, as I talked to Norman Fisher a while back about when his book on the, I don't know, on compassion, that he always says that in Zen, compassion is implicit. We don't explicit it so much, but it's implicit. I mean, that's a Mahayana's thing, right? Like we're already enlightened. Like how implicit can you get, right? That we're already lovely beings and love each other. It's already there. And yet, as I have practiced, and this is probably, I really appreciate that you really pointed towards the faith in Blanche, and actually made my eyes tear a little bit, is because, as I practice, really, I've become much more like faith, faith in the fundamental Dharma and the teachings of the Dharma. And that carries me through all the difficulty of Sangha and developing
Yes.
trust in Sangha, right? So yeah, that's, and in the five faculties that actually again, this is why I lean on the Theravada tradition some, because they really point towards it begins with faith.
I
And
went
it's,
to Dogasan once with Mel, and I said, "Oh, I'm so discouraged, you know." And he leaned forward and he said, "Are you discouraged in yourself or in the Dharma?"
yeah.
And I
Yeah,
said, "Oh, myself. I have faith in the Dharma." He said, "Okay."
okay then. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I know we're getting close to the end of our time together, but wondering if you're okay if we see if there's any questions stirring from others in the group. If people have them, you can either write them in the chat or you could raise your hand. And we can invite your questions. Is that okay with the two of you?
Yes, of course.
Wonderful, thank you.
I love Q&A because it's what people find really interesting, not just my blabbering.
Chris Norris, I saw your physical hand raised.
Yeah, of course it's me again. I always have something I'm curious about. Thank you so much, Reverend Leanne, for this. I'm really curious, and I'm going to go check out your book. What landed with me, and I'm wondering again how you frame this and brought it in a way that we don't often talk about, is that to restore, we must agree that hurt and harm has happened.
Yeah.
Wrote this down. I'm hoping I'm getting it right. And then we have to understand the origin of that hurt and harm. And I feel like that is part of that I struggle with a lot, is just my own ignorance, and how I want, that's part of my practice, is to educate myself, learn factual things, and then also share that with other people, so that in my practice learning about my fellow beings on this planet, whether they're creatures or humans or parts of the land. So anything more that you have to say about why you brought that in or how you brought that in on the Eightfold Path, I'm just curious about. And if there are things in your book that I could go refer myself to learn more about it.
And I apologize, your sound's a little off. So what is it that you're asking me what I focus on?
I'm sorry. I guess I'm just very curious about the idea of, to restore things, we must agree that hurt and harm has happened, and the origin of that hurt and harm, and that I want to, dedicate my part of my practice to learning about that and in community. So anything more about that from your book, from your relating it to the Eightfold Path?
Oh, well, I'm not sure I can answer as it relates to the Eightfold Path in a succinct way, because there are 8 of them. Maybe what I'll say is that, so traditional one, let's see, I should, because I have gone through these a few times and worked on them with Gil quite a bit, is that, the thing is, the traditional way is what is the origin of dukkha? And they come from causes and conditions, right? Which points it towards more of the karma part of it for sure. Here's the thing. I'm pretty sure the way I framed it, I can't all of a sudden, of course, have it exactly how I did end up framing the Four Noble Truths exactly. But I believe it is to understand fully the causes and condition is what I put. And so, and the other thing, it's hard to give a really brief answer, but I'll just throw in a couple of things. One is that there are practice instructions for each of the Four Noble Truths. And the first is to investigate. First Noble Truth, we investigate. So if we investigate what is dukkha, or what is hurt and harm and harming, then that's why investigation is so important. With the First Noble Truth. And if you think of it as restoration, that's where we all have to do our research to figure out what the problem is. And then in the research, we have to agree on what the problem before we can go and solve it. And that's where the conflict is. You can see any conflict is the agreement isn't what is. There's so many wars that we didn't agree, we can't agree. Of course, the other piece is trauma on top of trauma, which is the other part to really be very clear about this book. And it came to me, more clearly as I wrote the book, is that we need to heal. We need to heal. The restoration is not some model, if you, on one level, of course, I used a model, the Eightfold Path, but really, if you got anything from this book more, is if it, like my developmental editor, helped me with the book, gave structure, put the content, and great. She, as I said, she put the foundation in it in that way. But the thing that came back where she was like, oh, I healed reading this book. And I was like, oh, you just gave me the best reply. Like, I don't need anything. I appreciate all the other stuff. But so if you go and investigate this book, if you came back to me or I came back or whatever, and you said, oh, I can't remember what the 8 factors are exactly, but I healed a bit more my X, Y, or Z, then I would be like, thank you, thank you, thank you. So the point is, how do we heal from harm? This is the point of the book. And more specifically racially in this book, but really all oppressions. I like to think it would work with all oppressions, and I have used it in other ways. So that's one. And then 2, so let me just finish the practice instruction. So the second practice instruction to the second noble truth is to abandon, but of course that's really hard to do. But the reason is if you understand fully the origins or the causes and condition for the rising of dukkha, then of course you would abandon it or you would let it go. The issue, of course, is that yes, we need to have a sight towards letting go or abandoning, but really fundamentally Buddhism, I understand it as when we realize, which is the instruction of the third noble truth, by the way, when we realize that the causes of condition are harmful, we automatically, how can we not go, I have to abandon these harmful ways or harmful thinking or harmful ways of relating, right? Or harmful structures. It becomes a moral imperative in that way. And it becomes the faith that drives you, like and the third noble truth, when you realize you actually, there's joy in it. because you realize, there is a way. It gives you energy to keep on doing it, right? And then the fourth, the instruction for the fourth noble truth is to develop the Eightfold Path. So that's why a lot of the work is in the Eightfold Path, right? So then the other thing that I will say though, and I know I'm not 100% sure I was that clear about this in the book, but as I've gone on, you know, on the book tour and have all these dialogues and stuff, is that and I think this came about in the courses too, is that so much of our training on anti-oppression or to restore, I think it's important to understand, but it our one of our main problem, I'll just use the word, is that I think that it is, how do I understand it more? How do I understand others more? And I think that's great. It really is great. And I think we need that for sure. And in fact, a lot of anti-racist stuff is, how do you understand this other group or that other group? And I think, like, for instance, in racism, when white people started to take white and awakening or privilege and entitlement training, you have to understand how racism impacts you and how it is that it harms you. You know, in these courses, you know, the white people in the courses are like, what do you mean? Oh my God, I just had to understand my privilege and entitlement, and now you're saying I have to say that it harmed me? Isn't that like, seem like an oxymoron? But of course it harmed you, because it kept you away from others, right? Anytime there's separation, that's the harm. So so then the other thing is that, just like Roshi said, when I went to Japan, he was like, I refuse to give, well, that's my wording. He said, I'm not going to give, for this Ango, I will be not giving Teisho because you all think you understand too much. Of course, he meant it more broadly in that Zen way, right? And then you just pop up and tell a little story. And Blanche was a little bit like that, huh? Flint, like, you know, like she gave Dharma talk, but they're pretty much the same topic. She had periods of things that she talked about, but you know, but it's the interaction with her and the little bits. So part of it is that, I think, is actually the shift. Here's another shift, is that we actually make less space for how do I understand, and we give more space to those others who haven't been given the platform to be understood. And that is why there has to be access, there has to be reparation, and there has to be giving up of power, or else it will never change. So it isn't so much going out, you know, to understand the mirrored things, right, Dogen? To think that you carry yourself forward and experience the mirrored things is delusion. That the mirrored things come forth and experience themselves is enlightenment. And that's what we need to create. Conditions for the mirrored things, especially the ones we think, I have no idea what you are, who you are. That's where we need to make the room for those voices and those experiences to be held up, to be as valuable. That's the other key, right? That other people's suffering is as valuable as your suffering. Because, of course it is. Because the big self, your suffering, you know, impacts me, and my suffering impacts you. And until we know that, and give it as equal value, you know, which is also why we have to heal ourselves before we can, well, not before, we can't wait till before, but certainly a lot of the work is healing ourselves so that we can be stable enough to say, hey, come on in, especially you who I don't understand, I'm afraid of, whatever, or we take ourselves into those situations so that we are exposed to that. And I think it is much more about making access. And so inclusivity, not from a power position, but inclusivity as in a horizontal. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. You're here too. Come on in. Or here you are. Tell me about you.
What a rich response to the question. Like you said, the Q&A oftentimes evokes so much information that hadn't may not have otherwise come forward. So, so just on a time check. So I know we're past our 8:30 points. And I'm curious. I see there's one person that has a hand raised, and want to just sort of see if there's time to give opportunity for one last question and then end. Is that okay with people, including the two of you, Flint, in the end?
Yes.
Okay.
Reverend Leanne, could you repeat, you just said something, let's give less space for how do I understand and more space for, could you repeat the more space for those who, I think I got the gist of it, but I like the way you put it.
I don't believe I said less space.
For those of,
Oh,
for
wait,
how
what?
I understand, how I understand, and more space for, that's what I thought you said.
Yeah, maybe I said less. Well, it's recorded. We'll find out. I think the only thing I pause about is, of course, depending on your positionality or your location, as I say in the book more, or the word I use more, your social locations in particular, that can actually be more harmful to think less. I need to get out of the way. I think that's how we have to be careful how that's used. So what I'm saying though is that in systems of domination or in conditions of power differential, those in the up power position, the task I think is much more to make more room for those who haven't been given access, or that so yes, I need to understand my suffering more, without a doubt, and if I'm in an up power position, which like right now I'm in the up power position for the most part, in this container, then I need to make room for those who don't get heard or access to power as much. So for instance, you probably experience this, like in and I use this example because it happens a lot, right? So in a setting of when we ask for question and answer, say, a lot of time I will say, I invite those who don't usually move forward to move forward first. And if you tend to move forward a lot, I invite you to move back. So that's an example of like making room for those who, because of conditioning might move back, or because of, and why I say conditioning, of course, we can talk about gentle conditioning, but we also talk about enforced conditioning, right? Really punitive kind of conditioning too. So there are reasons why, certain people pull back and need that invitation to move forward, or create as an automatic way for that there's easy access, just like we build ramps so that you don't have to ring the bell first, to be let in to a building that has stairs, right? So it's not just always like explicit, it needs to be implicit in some ways. But I think part of the challenge of restoration work is this is why, so much of this kind of work is community work. So let the community tell you what's needed. We all know this, right? I mean, now we just kind of think of it in larger ways in some ways. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you.
One small last comment, or brief, I hope, because you're really, something's really resonating deeply. Living in Hawaii and living on a small island, Molokai, which is the highest percentage population of native Hawaiians of any place, as a white man, I find myself in a down power position for the first time in my life in a way that I hadn't anticipated. And I didn't even understand the way that I assumed certain things, of course. But to be quiet, and the main thing I get is the request, please ask permission to be here, to speak, to make certain, just ask permission. Don't assume. And that's just one little thing. And then I began to, like you said, begin to realize, okay, how has this unconscious assumption harmed me, and how does it harm others? Because I live in it now in a different way than I never had before. So I just wanted to make that comment, that's all.
Sure.
Well, thank you so much to both of you for taking time out of your maybe early afternoon, Flint, and late afternoon, Leanne. It's such a gift to have your time and the sharing of your experience and wisdom. And so thank you so much for being willing to come and support our practice and our study and with your presence.
Thank you for reconnecting us.
Yeah, thank you. Great to
So
see
nice.
you all, and thank you, Flint. All right, thank you, Ryan and CJ and all of you. Shall we
Wonderful.
dedicate the merit, or?
Yeah, we will. I'm gonna just hit stop recording and then